So let's jump into the last part of chapter 10, which is oligopolies. So an oligopoly is when we don't have monopolistic competition, but we also don't have a monopoly. Basically, what we're having here is we don't have a lot of small firms. So, like in terms of the grocery store, we have a ton of options. Imagine we have a few very large firms. So now instead of it being a million types of cereal, you only have four, right? But it's the same aisle. But now there's four types of cereal in the whole aisle. So they're very large firms. And they control most or all of the sales in the industry. They do have the option to either be a differentiated product or a homogeneous product. So the differentiated product, right, they could be in the same market in terms of, it being type of cereal, right, where they're differentiated, but they also could be homogeneous good, right, like oil. Sometimes they try to make it differentiated, right, but they also have the option to make something homogeneous, make the same good, but they are different firms. Okay? Examples like the oil industry or auto industry, they're very like a few options, but they service most of the world. So they're pretty large firms. So some characteristics about them is that there are barriers to entry. So sometimes it could be very high setup costs. That's what it could be. It could be something that is preventing them from starting. There could be something like a patent, right? Something like a patent could really prevent someone to do that. So high setup. Maybe there's already a patent for those groups of firms there. So, or maybe there's some sort of government regulation where they say, you know what, we're only going to have these firms operating. So there's some sort of barrier to entry there, and that's where we only have a few large firms. The next thing is that they do have economies of scale. Remember, economies of scale was where if the quantity is going up, the average cost is going down. Economies of scale, higher cost, higher quantity, lower cost. And that's what's happening with oligopolies, is that they're really, really large, so they're able to take advantage of the economies of scale. And this is the most important part here, is that they are mutually interdependent, meaning that the action of one firm is likely to affect the other. So let's think about gas stations for a second here, right? So let's say we have four of them, right? In the entire town, there's only these four gas stations. And so what would happen if A were to decrease price? Okay, what would B do? All right, B is looking across the street and they see that A has lowered their price. What do consumers do? Consumers are going to go wherever it's cheaper, right? So they would go to A. And so B, right, they have two options. They could either stay here at their price and lose out on their customers, or they could lower their price to match A, okay, and lose out some profits, but they could gain some customers back. So that's how they're mutually interdependent, is that they're so large that to where their decisions really could affect somebody else. Okay? And we'll get into the game that they play with each other. If it's a duopoly, that means there's two firms, but most of the time we're going to be dealing with oligopolies, where there's multiple. Okay. Now, how do we determine if it's an oligopoly? Is we're going to be looking at their market share, basically at the whole grocery store aisle in cereal, right? How much of the aisle does that one firm have? Okay. And what we're going to do is look at a concentration ratio. So if we're looking at the top four firms, okay, we have the whole aisle full of cereal, and if we were to look at how much space the top four cereals are taking up, and if it takes up 85% of the aisle, right, that is going to be an oligopoly. They have 85% of the market, and only 15% is everybody else. That's an oligopoly. Okay? The concentration ratio of 40 or higher is an oligopoly. So basically how this works is if we were to look at cars, for instance, right? We have Ford, we have Chevy, we have Toyota, we have Honda, right? We have all of these different ones. Okay, you can make a list. You could do BMW, you can do Mercedes, okay? And let's say Ford had 20% of the market, Chevy had 15, Toyota had 10, Honda had 5, BMW has 2%, and Mercedes has 1. So since this doesn't add up to 100, we have to assume that there are smaller firms in here as well. Okay, there's like the extra ones down here. Okay. So what we're going to do is look at the top 4 firms, and we're going to add their market shares together. So in terms of a piece of pie here, okay, Ford would have 20%, Chevy would have 15%, right? So out of the entire sales of cars, this is the market share of those firms. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to add together the top 4, 20, 15, 10, and 5. You added those together, that should equal 50%. So therefore, the 4 firm concentration ratio is 50. So therefore, this is an oligopoly because you have the top 4 firms have more than 40% of the market. So this is considered an oligopoly. If you would have done this calculation and got 30%, it's not an oligopoly, it's probably monopolistic competition. Okay. So, when we're really trying to figure out what do we do with these markets, it really just comes down to 2 options. Okay. Since they're really big, these firms, they could compete with one another, right? We could have the situation with the gas stations where they lower their price and firm B has to make a choice. We can make that happen. We can compete. Or we could collude. And collusion is where all these gas stations act like one monopoly. And they all keep their prices high. To where you as a consumer are like, well, what am I going to do? I have to buy gas, and all of them are having the same price. So I have to go to this one or this one, right? They're all high prices. They are all acting like one monopoly at that point. And that's called collusion. Collusion works like this. If store B calls store A and they say, hey, let's increase our price to $5 a gallon, and they both agree to do that, that is collusion, right? Where you are actually setting the price together. Competing would be, you're looking at across the street and you're seeing what firm A is doing, and then you make your decision. Okay, so if firm A goes to $5 a gallon, you, right, as firm B, could look at that and go like, okay, well, do I want to go $5 or do I want to stay where I'm at? And that's where competition comes in. But colluding is where you actually are going to be agreeing to both be at $5. Okay? So collusion is when firms act together to reduce output and keep prices high. So just like a monopoly, we reduce quantity so we could increase the price and make more profits. Right? Holding down the industry output will charge a higher price, and then they get more profits for everybody. Okay? So collusion is where you call them on the phone and you all agree to raise price. When you do this, this is collusion. The cartel is when we have the group of the firms that are colluding. So firms collude, and the firms that are colluding is a cartel. a group of firms that have a formal agreement to collude to produce the monopoly output and sell at the monopoly price. When they do that, when those group of firms, that is a cartel. Okay? So what does, what's the possibility that this agreement holds? Because firm A and B, they could agree to, both charge $5, but is this the best decision for everybody? Okay, what if someone were to make a different decision? Okay, so you're looking at firm A and you're like, I know I said $5, right? But if I charge 4, I could get my customers back and they have nobody and I can increase my profits. So I'm going to do that and I'm going to steal their customers away. So you could break the agreement in an effort to get an increase in profits because of what firm A is their prices are too high. So in terms of collusion, right, the goal would be to increase profits, but we also kind of have the situation where you don't agree to the cartel and you can do your own thing to increase profits as well. So when we're going back and forth about what are we going to do, that's where we have a little thing called game theory. And game theory is going to be a little bit of a complicated subject, but we're going to make it as simple as possible here. Game theory is a branch of mathematics that basically is looking at a situation where we have players making decisions, and then you get a payoff based off of that decision. Basically, if firm A were to raise prices, they earn $100. But if they were to lower prices, they would earn $200, right? Because you made a decision, you get a payoff. It could be, really anything. It could be an increase in grades. Like you could either study or you can go to the football game. If you study, you can get, 10 points on your exam. If you go to the football game, you can have 2 hours with your friends, right? So there's a payoff here that you're getting. Maybe you're happy, maybe you're extra happy, things like that. There's some sort of payoff from your decision. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at one person's decisions and another person's decisions as well. So let's talk about the prisoner's dilemma, because this is a classic example on how my decision is going to affect your decision and you're thinking about how my decision is going to affect you. So here we go. So in the prisoner's dilemma, we have a situation where prisoner A is not allowed to talk to prisoner B. Okay? And prisoner B is not allowed to talk to prisoner A. They're in 2 separate interrogation rooms, and they're being interrogated. And the investigator comes in and they say, hey, person A, if you confess, okay, you can either get 1 year or 5 years. And the only reason you would get 1 year is because prisoner B remains silent. Basically, it's like, who's going to confess to this crime here? Right? Or are you going to remain silent? So prisoner B, so basically prisoner A is like, okay, so what my decision is based off of prisoner B. So basically, if prisoner B stays silent, that's going to affect my time in prison. Okay? So if prisoner B remains silent, so like they choose remain silent. If you're wondering why this top one, because it's prisoner B and they remain silent. Okay? So that column right there. If prisoner B remains silent, okay, A could get 2 years or 1 year if B stays silent. Okay? Looking at these options, what is better for A? 2 years in prison or 1 year in prison? Okay? And the answer is 1 year in prison. Okay? If B remains silent, it is better for A to confess. Okay? Now, what if B were to confess? What would be better over here? Well, if B were to confess, then A could get 8 years or they could get 5 years. And so obviously it's better for for prisoner A to get 5 years. And so that would be to confess. Right? So in either situation, firm A would confess to the crime. And that is their better choice. Okay? Let's do prisoner B. So now we're done with that interrogation room. Let's go to prisoner B. So prisoner B is trying to figure out, well, if A remains silent, so now we have to flip it around here. Okay, because now we're on prisoner A, and if they remain silent, it's a horizontal one. So if A remains silent, B gets 2 years or 1 year. Obviously, they're going to pick the 1 year. Now, if A were to confess, what would B do? So if A were to confess, so they would do that bottom row there, B would either get 8 years or 5 years. And obviously 5 years is better, so they would choose 5. Okay? And what do we see here? Did B ever remain silent? No. All right, because look, B, we have no circles here. B does not remain silent. But does B confess? B always confesses. Always. So therefore, right, what does A do? A confesses. What does B do? Confess. So therefore, they both will confess to the crime. And the reason this is the prisoner's dilemma is because what is the best choice? The best choice for both of them is to collude and remain silent. Basically, if prisoner A could come to prisoner B and say, hey, remain silent, that's their best choice. Okay? They would collude and they would say, hey, let's just remain silent, it's going to be best. So, since they can't communicate with one another, they actually end up confessing. That's the key, and that's the dilemma. So with game theory, you got to go in a way where you're blocking off the decisions, A and B, okay, and then making their decisions from there. So let's take another look at it, okay. So firm A could either hold down output or increase output. And the only reason they would do this is basically, they're trying to increase their profits. So I like to start here. What would firm A do? Well, what would firm A do if B holds down output? So what I would like to do is I like to kind of block off this side here. Okay, and the reason I block this side off is because I'm saying B holds down output. So that's what B is doing. If B is doing that, what is better for A? Is it better for A to get $1,000 or $1,500? Obviously, it's better for A to get $1,500, so we would choose that option there. So now that we're done with that, okay, what if we were to flip it around and say if B were to increase output? So now I'm going to block off the other side. Okay. If B were to increase output, what's better for A? Okay. So B is choosing increasing output. So we're going to leave that alone. So what does A do? A gets 200 or 400. And A would get 400. That's what they're choosing. So what are you noticing here? Did A hold down output? No. Because look here, we don't have any circles up there. So they only increase output. Okay? Because that's where our circles are. What about firm B? Okay, if firm B was over here, and we said firm A were to hold down output. So we're going to block off increase output. Okay, and we're going to see what happens now. What does B do? Does B get $1,000 or $1,500? B is going to get $1,500. That's the better choice. Okay, and now we're going to block off hold down output because now firm A is increasing output. If firm A increases output, what happens with B? Do they do $200 or $400? And they would choose $400. Okay? So therefore, A always chooses increase output. So A, increase output. And B would increase output as well. Okay? Which leads to the next thing, which is a thing called the dominant strategy equilibrium. The thing with the dominant strategy equilibrium is that when you have a dominant strategy, this means that you're making the same decision no matter what. Like in this example here, right? A always increases output. So that's their dominant strategy. Like no matter what B does, A will always choose to increase output. So that's their dominant strategy. A dominant strategy equilibrium is where both players have a dominant strategy. And so when we come to an equilibrium where we have the two circles next to each other, like an equilibrium, that is a dominant strategy equilibrium. So therefore, if A always increases output, that's a dominant strategy. And if B always increases output, therefore together, this is a dominant strategy equilibrium. Let's take a look at that real quick. Where basically, like the prisoner's dilemma, see how A always confesses and B always confesses. So those are their dominant strategy. And right here is a dominant strategy equilibrium. Okay, just where the equilibrium is. If we have just an equilibrium, that's called a Nash equilibrium. A Nash equilibrium is where basically you're making the best decision for you based off of somebody else. Don't worry about that. The main thing is that it's an equilibrium. You're having the two circles next to each other. Okay? So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at Bob. If we are Bob and Liz chooses high, so Bob is on the left, so therefore his profit numbers are on the left. Okay? So Bob will either get $400 or $600. If Liz chooses high, Bob will choose 600. And if Liz chooses low, then he will choose 100. So therefore, Bob always chooses low because he never chooses high. Now, if we're Liz, okay, and Bob were to choose high, what's better for Liz? Now, Liz is on top, so Liz's numbers are on top. So therefore, what's better for Liz? 500 or 300? That would be 500. right? And then if Bob were to choose low, what's better for Liz? 200. What are you noticing about Liz now? Is that she is choosing high and low. So what about Bob? Bob is always choosing low. So Bob is going low, and then Liz goes high and low. So does Bob have a dominant strategy? Yes. Does Liz have a dominant strategy? No, right? Because she does high and low, so she does not have dominant strategy. So do we have a dominant strategy equilibrium? No. You both have to have a dominant strategy to have a dominant strategy equilibrium. But do we have an equilibrium? Do we have two circles in the same box? Yes. So therefore your equilibrium would be both choosing low. So that's your Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium is low, low. Because you still have those two circles next to each other. That's an equilibrium. Dominant strategy equilibrium is going to be where both players have a dominant strategy and you have an equilibrium. That's a dominant strategy equilibrium. So that's it for game theory. Okay, the main thing is figuring out, okay, well, if they make that choice, what does this person do? If they make this choice, what does this person do? Then flip it around. Okay, if they make this choice here, okay, what does this person do? And then flip it here and go, what do they do? Okay. So that's it for oligopolies, and then we'll start the next chapter, and it's going to be fun. I'll see you there.